You're watching the New Stack Makers, a podcast for people who develop, deploy, and manage at-scale software. For more information and articles about at-scale technologies, please visit thenewstack.io. Now enjoy the show.
Kinetica is available as a fully managed service in the cloud. Continued focus on core features and an improved workbench interface drives growth among enterprises, new tech, and government agencies, including some of the largest IoT data analytics implementations in the world. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the New Stack Makers. I'm your host, Heather Joslyn, features editor at TNS, and today we're going to talk about what everyone's talking about, which is generative AI. There's been a lot of speculation and hand-wringing about what impact ChatGPT and the like will have on employment in the tech industry, especially for developers. But what is its potential for organizations and businesses? What are the new opportunities that will open up, especially in the area of data analytics? We're joined in this conversation by Nima Negahban, CEO of Kinetica, a database company that's already incorporated generative AI into its product. Hi, Nima.
Hey, nice to be here.
Nice to have you join us. Can you tell us a little bit about Kinetica?
Yeah. Kinetica is an analytic database that allows you to do really advanced time series, spatial, and graph processing for all of your data in real time, through a standard SQL interface, without having to do a huge amount of data engineering and pre-planning to make it all work, make it performant. And the way we've done that is we've built our own processing engine from the ground up that takes advantage of many core compute devices like the modern CPU and GPU. And, the way we've done that is rethought the fundamental structures and algorithms of database to leverage those compute devices better than anybody else. And, what that really gives you is the kind of query, horsepower to be able to query these large data sets in an ad hoc way without having to do planning and data engineering.
Great. And thank you for explaining that. And also we want to thank Kinetica, which is sponsoring today's conversation. So let's jump in. Actually, I want to ask you, before we get to how Kinetica is using generative AI, when did you first hear about OpenAI's ChatGPT 3, which seems to be kind of the big bang of this generative AI?
Actually, I've been following it, really since GPT-2. I mean, it's been something that I think has been really interesting. I didn't, fully, I think, appreciate how powerful it was going to become or how fast the leap from 2 to 3 and 3 to 4 has been. But, I've been tracking it for a minute.
Yeah. And when did you realize we're going to need to incorporate this into what we do?
I think when GPT-3 came out, I think that for me was like, wow, this is going to be something that is going to really disrupt analytics. And we have to figure out where how we leverage generative AI to deliver on that next generation analytic experience.
And so how is Kinetica using generative AI?
Yeah. So, like I mentioned, I think in analytics, generative AI is really going to disrupt things and democratize things, right? If you think about it today, if it's a dashboard, an application, a microservice, all of the querying has been pre-planned, data engineered, and is under very tight control. I think the main killer app of generative AI in analytics, at least initially, is going to be, allowing people to generate analytics on the fly, allowing people to generate really complex SQL based on just a natural language question, right? Mm-hmm. And so with Kinetica, like I mentioned, we have this brute force engine that can do ad hoc query really, really well in a really performant way so that you don't have to do all this planning. We're coupling that engine with the ability to generate SQL on the fly against natural language, and we're doing that with our own large language model that we're going to be rolling out today. The version that's out there and released is leveraging OpenAI, but it's really that idea that, hey, if you can take that killer app and marry it with an engine that can do this querying, in a way that's performant, in a way that doesn't require, whole teams of people to prepare the data, that can be exceptionally powerful for an enterprise.
What do you see as some of the potential use cases for this democratization of data analytics? And
the most simple was an Alexa for all your data in your ecosystem in real time, right? Where you could, ask what store is performing best today, or what products hurt or sell underperform when it's raining, like things like that. That's within the purview, in a very short order of what we can do today, because with large language models and an engine like ours, you can generate the correct SQL to answer these questions against the huge amounts of data that enterprises are collecting for themselves. So really, it just gives a whole new level of visibility into how your enterprise is running.
Do you see what are some of the challenges you see for organizations and teams that they need to overcome to make the use of this this new
Yeah.
level
I think
of
one is security, right? So, is it okay to send the necessary information that you need to a large language model? With what we have today using OpenAI, that's some of the concerns that potential customers have, and that's why we're working on having our own, kind of internal large language model that would live within the digital perimeter of a customer. So, that's one of the biggest ones, and the second is just correctness. Like, how do we make sure that, okay, if my CEO is asking a question and it generates that analytic on the fly and gives them an answer, how do we make sure that it's right? How do we make sure that the information that we're going to give that person is correct, and it's not going to put them down a false path?
Yeah, there's definitely been concerns so that with hallucinations, as they say, like
Right, right, and that's a bigger problem. I mean, we're very focused on the idea of, like, language to query, right? And so I
Mhm,
think that focus makes it a little bit more of a tractable problem for us,
mhm,
um, especially just as a database. But yeah, I mean, I think that the concerns I'm talking about, are the same, concerns that are around large language models, writ large in enterprise, which is like, security, correctness, hallucinations. Like, how do we put controls around this so we understand, how they're performing first, and then later is, how do you improve it?
um, how should organizations go about preparing strategically for using this, both in terms of how they would use it in their business or how they work, but also in terms of the personnel that they need? Will they need maybe fewer data engineers but more security people, or
Yeah, I mean, I think, for us in the analytics space, I think it's going to be something that really kind of superpowers developers, and also can open up creative possibilities for developers and product managers around, okay, how do we leverage this to be more efficient in our day to day, but how do we maybe put up really guided access to some of these generative capabilities in what we expose to our users in the enterprise, to
Mhm,
make new features that previously you wouldn't have been able to think of before, right? I think that's going to be the fine line. I don't think like developers and data engineers are going to be out of a job in mass. I think there's going to be really an expectation of more efficiency, and like being able, like just with Copilot, GitHub Copilot as an example, like
mhm.
you're able to do stuff, and that saves time, and as Copilot's getting better, it's able to help you with more complex problems that are huge projects. Like it's getting there. It's not there yet, but I'd expect that the enterprise at large is going to be thinking about, okay, how do we make our developers more efficient with this, and how do we expose this to users in a way that's controlled, that gives them what they need, doesn't put them down the wrong path, but ultimately gives them like a huge new capability.
One question I have is about this. I think this whole democratization of data analysis, like giving the people on the business side easy access to this
Hmm.
data, and so on. Do you? I mean, is there a danger of like people on the business side um, being having too much access to data, where every decision is uh,
Yeah, I mean, I get, it's possible, like I said, where like if some things are, maybe there's not enough data collected, or maybe the wrong kind of business decisions are made based off of the data that at that point in time.
Mhm.
I certainly think though that the upside, outweighs the downside, right? Like to be able to just sit here and kind of talk to your data, so to speak, where you've got this ability to generate that analytic on the fly, and then an engine like Kinetica to deliver the answer and have it, be something that's performant, and then kind of keep that conversation going. I think that's something that can be, incredibly powerful for the enterprise.
What do you see as some of the next problems that you know Kinetica itself might be trying to solve or to tackle with this?
Yeah, so I mean, we're leveraging generative AI in our product, but we're also going to be supporting the generative AI stack, right? And so,
Mhm.
we're rolling out really, I think, innovative vector search, hybrid vector search capability, which allows large language models to leverage us for nearest neighbor embedding search. I think there is a lot of thinking around how do we leverage vector capability and like large scale fine tunings for large language models. How does that all fit into what we're trying to deliver for the enterprise? So with Kinetica, that's what we're really thinking about is doing vector search. That's kind of well understood, but okay, what about making it really simple to do large scale fine tuning of your large language model against your data? We're thinking through things like that. So for us, it's hey, how do you leverage it in your product to make a more innovative product? But then how do you also, as a piece of infrastructure, really support this generative AI development stack? And so that's where a lot of our thinking is right now.
One thing also, we've been seeing some amazing uses of generative AI every day. Is there something in particular that you've seen in the last few weeks or months that's just blown your mind?
I think probably everyone's heard of it by now, but I think like just in the past few months, I think the one thing that really got me was Auto GPT, where you're basically feeding it tasks and goals, and it's kind of a feedback loop upon itself, so that it can actually accomplish multi-step problems, and how fast that project is moving. I think that to me has kind of been one of the most interesting things to come out in the past few months.
Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so
Like,
Auto GPT, essentially it's an open source framework that is really allowing you to do multi-step problems via a large language model, right? And
mhm.
so you can kind of set goals, and essentially it starts to feed itself tasks upon tasks to kind of accomplish that goal. So it's you can think of it as like an orchestrator project for large language models, but
Mhm.
I think what's interesting is how effective it's been in a short time, to do some interesting things, right? I think this is where where large language models are today. It's impressive, but I think when you look at things like Auto GPT and start to extrapolate, like you could see how you could really start to solve some more complicated tasks when you start to orchestrate these things correctly.
Um, let's dive in a little bit to some of the use cases. Like, what do you see? You mentioned, like, you can find eventually, sort of an Alexa for
For your data.
your internal data. Are there particular industries you think will adopt this first, or will find this especially useful?
I mean, I think it's going to be probably pretty quickly adopted across the board. I mean, obviously, I think when you think about things like Customer 360, or uh, if you think about finance, and to be able to just at least from what Kinetica is delivering, to be able to just ask a question, right, and have it deliver you the answer against all of your data in real time, to give you an up-to-date answer. What's the best store today, what store is performing best today, or ask it something more complicated, like based on my customer foot traffic, which product is being seen most in aisle 10, like some stuff like that.
Mhm.
um, I think that's going to have immediate impact. I think you can think about those type of use cases in every vertical where, like I said, it's enterprises are collecting this data, and it's being able to generate that analytic on the fly that's going to really kind of surface the insights that are in that data that are currently kind of just just sitting there, right? Because
Mm.
today it's like, well, my dashboard doesn't look for that right now, or my application doesn't make that correlation today, right? Well, that's going to go away, and it's going to be, well, here's my question, and I can get that input, and then again ask another question. That I think, to do that and have it come back in a few seconds rather than hours, is something that everyone's going to want across all the different verticals.
What do you see as the next step for all this in terms of the next version of of generative AI? What do you, like, 5 years from now? What do you think? What do you think will be the issues that will be solved by this?
Solved, I mean, I think it's going to be much more along the lines of like, where things like auto GPT are going, where it's orchestrating them, right? Because these are still models that are really kind of text completion engines, right? And
Mhm.
how do you orchestrate that in a way that can actually accomplish something really, that's a multi-step process? I think that's where the whole generative AI space is going to be going. How do you, and then the other part of it, I think that people are really grappling with now is, how do we leverage this capability for our data, right? And um, that is part of the reason why the vector search, the vector database and vector search capability world is exploding right now, because people want to generate embeddings and then do embedding search. So that's part of it. I think we're trying to figure out, how does large scale fine tuning work well, or work with impact in the enterprise space. So that's something that um, you know I think in 5 years is going to be figured out. But I think really, the big boom is going to be around, how do we orchestrate these things in a powerful way that can get things done. And I think that's still trying to be figured out right now, because as they are today, they can do really great text completion tasks, but to say, okay, do this really multifaceted, multi-step project, obviously they can't really do that right now.
You mentioned vector search, and what, for some, if someone is listening to this who's not deeply embedded in the data world, what could you define vector search and how it might be
Right.
used?
So yeah. So a vector, in this context, is basically up to a 1,500 number long array, or vector, that these large language models generate, to basically represent the data that you just gave it, right? And so with vector search and vector databases, they act as kind of like a knowledge base for your large language model. And as it's tasked with work, it leverages that embedding database, that vector database, to help generate a appropriate response based on the embeddings that you've showed it. So that's one of the things that you're seeing a lot of databases come out with, and that's something that Kinetica is coming out with as well. I think beyond that, there's questions around what the database's role should be in supporting the generative AI stack, and how large language models should be fine tuned, and what are the applications of that. I think people are still thinking about how that looks for the enterprise at large.
What do you see as the in your view, what should be the role of the database in generative AI, especially working at scale?
I personally think there's a huge opportunity for the database space to obviously support things like having all of the embeddings, but I think also orchestrating large language models, and an embedding generation and fine tuning. I think you're going to probably see databases and data frameworks take more of an active role in helping that process, because today it's pretty manual. There's a few frameworks like Hugging Face that's out there that are trying to do that, but again, they don't have the data, so you've kind of like got the data gravity problem kind of occurring there as well. So I think databases are gonna, and data lakes are gonna, and data frameworks that sit around data lakes are gonna be more and more active in this space.
So you see databases are going to have to be more supportive of this,
Like the generative AI workflow.
yeah, of the workflow. Are there
Totally.
ways that you think, are there ways that you can see, whether it's Kinetica or companies are working to make it more, make them more supportive of the workflow.
Yeah, I think that right now there's an arms race for that, and every database and data product provider is coming out with their vector search. I think ours is unique because you can mix it with our time series and spatial and graph capabilities to do really elaborate vector hybrid vector search. But yeah, I think vector search, in 6 months' time, every database is going to have it, and it's going to get down to, okay, well, who has more creative ways of being able to leverage it, or who has the more scale or performance. So I think that's definitely one of the first things that is going to be kind of writ large, and then beyond that, how do you look at supporting large language models in more innovative ways? I think that's what people are trying to figure out right now, and Kinetica is working on that, but so are others.
If you are listening to this and if you're a developer or an engineer who's interested in getting involved in this new, solving these new problems, working in generative AI, working in databases that use generative AI, how would you advise people prepare themselves for career path in that field?
I mean, I think the first thing to do that's just really simple is to kind of just look at like the OpenAI API, and just start to understand the basic elements of how you interact with a large language model, and from there you will kind of start to understand how the ecosystem is going to revolve around it. That's the easiest thing to do to get started, because you can. They have a little playground. You'll understand the basics, and then you'll start to see all of the different pieces of the data ecosystem that's getting built up to support it or leverage it.
Guess that's a wrap. We'd like to thank Nima Negahban of Kinetica for joining us today. We'd like to thank Kinetica as well for sponsoring today's conversation.
Thank you.
And we'd like to thank all of you for joining us. Also, request, we'll be writing and talking a lot about generative AI in the coming months, and presumably for quite as far into the future as we can see. So please comment or tweet at us if there are questions you have about the topic or angles you'd like us to explore. This has been Heather Joslyn for the New Stack Makers. Thanks, and see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you like this video, please give us a thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more videos like this, you can always subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're on all the major social media platforms. You can always find us at thenewstack.io. We hope to see you soon.